Join me and learn how to make these gorgeous cosy slipper socks by Debbie Bliss. It's a really easy pattern. They're knitted flat and seamed, so no circular needles to worry about. Let's get started. We're going to have a go at knitting the Debbie Bliss Cosy Slipper Sock. It's so much fun to knit. It's knitted flat. It's super cosy, as you can see. It's got a big roll neck at the top there where your little foot goes in here. There's a left foot and a right foot. This one here is the left foot. The toe has that shaping for your left foot, and we're going to knit the right foot today just to match this little one. But it's really good fun. It's knitted flat. That's the sole of the sock. It's really a good project for a beginner who wants to try something else. That's a bit, got a few little techniques in it to learn. So I'm going to pop that over there and we're going to start. Now I'm using Debbie Bliss Cashmerino Chunky, which is deliciously soft and so warm. And you will need for this, you'll need a pair of 6mm needles for starting the rib, some scissors, a tapestry needle for sewing up afterwards, yarn, and then some 5.5mm knitting needles. I'm actually going to use 5mm knitting needles because I know that my tension is a bit loose when I'm knitting on camera, so I'm going to use 5mm, but the pattern calls for 5.5mm. If you think that your tension, if you do a tension square, but if you think your tension is a bit on the loose side, I would go down to a 5. You'll need some Cashmerino Chunky. We use one ball of the accent colour, the contrast colour, which just goes for the cuff, and then the main colour, you'll need 2 balls of that for a pair of slipper socks. These are just the best gift. They are so comfy and they're so squidgy. Oh, they're lovely. Keep your toes warm. So let's start with casting on. It doesn't matter how you cast on for this project. So because we're casting on with a 6mm needle, it makes the rib a little bit softer at the top. But in actual fact, when we work the rib, I'll just show you if I unfold that, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a shaping to it. And that is because the top 14 rows are knitted on a 6mm needle, and the second section of ribbing is done on the smaller needle of 5.5 or a 5. And that means that it's just got a little bit more closeness down there, so when you fold the top over, it's nice and cozy and big enough to fold over nicely without making it baggy on the inside. So we start off casting on 40 stitches. There are 2 sizes for this slipper stock. So for the smallest size, I'm casting on 40 stitches. I've used a long tail cast on, whatever you prefer here. So we're going to knit a simple rib, which is all about knitting knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and in the next row you knit the knits and purl the pearls. So let's get started with the rib. So needle in, yarn around, under and off. Then bring your yarn round to the front and we're going to purl the next stitch, which means taking the needle up into the stitch, yarn up around the needle, put it down and off. Then bring your yarn back round to the back of the needle, knit, yarn in, around, under and off. Bring your yarn to the front of the needle to purl upwards into the stitch, purl, round and off. And then we take the yarn back round to the back of the needle to knit, and then bring your yarn around to the front to purl. And we're going to work knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl all the way along the row. Now, my grandma taught me to knit, and my mum actually always said that one of the easiest ways to make a rib work more easily for you is that when you do the stitch, you put the yarn in its place for the next stitch as you go along. So I do a knit and at the same time bring my yarn around for the purl. I do the pearl, and as I finish this pearl stitch, I'm bringing the yarn around the back for the next knit stitch. It doesn't matter, but it just makes your rib more flowy for you if you can bring that yarn positioning into your stitch. But if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. So you can just knit, bring the yarn to the front and purl. So we knit and purl. I'm just going to take you to the end of the row so that I can show you the second row of our rib. Okay, so when you've knitted your first row of rib, we're just talking about this if you haven't done a rib before and it's new to you, I just want to show you. So you can identify which stitches are the knits and which are the purls by sort of reading your work. So I just want to show you, even in the very first row here, you can see that the knit row has a little V shape, the knit stitch has a little V shape, and the purl stitch has a little bump next to it. Knit, purl, knit, purl. And it's really important to be able to read your work like this all through your knitting, but particularly when you're doing a rib, so that you know which stitch is coming next. So you can see a little V there for a knit stitch and a purl bump, V, bump, V, bump. So when we work the next row of the rib, we follow what's there. So if there's a knit stitch, you knit it. If there's a purl bump, you purl it. And you'll see the rib start to emerge. So I'm going to knit, bring the yarn forward and purl that little purl bump, knit the knit stitch, purl the purl bump, knit and purl. And I just want to show you here, you can see the way the rib is emerging. You've got two little purl bumps, two little V shapes, two little purl bumps, two little V shapes. And this is what we mean when we talk about reading and knitting. It's just getting to know those stitches. And if I show you on the sock that we already have here, you can see the V shapes and the purl bumps. And that is how you read your knitting when it's a rib. So for a rib, we knit the knits and we purl the purls. So I'm going to knit 13 rows, another 13 rows of rib, and I'll meet you back here to change needles onto our smaller needles. Right, so we've done our rib in on a 6mm needle, and now we're going to change to a smaller needle. I've actually got 5mm needles here, but the pattern calls for 5.5, but I know I'm a little bit of a loose knitter, so I'm going to switch to a 5. So I'm just going to rib as normal, knit and purls, whoopsie, onto the smaller needle, and then when you finish the row and all your stitches are on the smaller needle, you just pick up the other one. So we have another 12 rows of ribbing on the smaller needle, and I shall meet you back here at the end of that. Okay, so we've done the two needle sizes of rib. So we've got the wider 6mm here and the 5.5 there. So the next thing we need to do before we start the body of the sock is just to do a decrease row across this rib. So the pattern tells us to rib 7 and then rib 2 together. And we do this sort of process together. Now, when we talk about rib in this way, in a decrease row, when the pattern instruction says rib, you know that it's knit 1 purl or knit 1 purl or knit 1 purl or whichever the rib is. When it says rib 2 together, all it actually means is to decrease at that point using either a purl 2 together or a knit 2 together without interrupting the integrity of the rib. There isn't a magical sort of rib 2 together stitch. So for example, let's start here. So the instruction here is to rib 7. So we're going to do knit, purl, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've ribbed 7 stitches, 2, 4, 6, 7, and the next stitch is a purl stitch. So what we're going to do actually is to purl these 2 together because we're on a purl stitch. So I'm going to bring the yarn in front, going to put my needle underneath and up the 2 stitches there, yarn around, pull through and pull off. Now the next stitch is a purl stitch, so I'm going to purl that, and this will keep the rib looking okay on the other side, on both sides, and then the next stitch is a knit stitch and we carry on. So when you have an instruction like this that says rib 2 together, what you're going to do is to knit or purl that stitch together and then follow the purl bumps and the V's to keep the integrity of the rib going. Now quite often what happens is you use rib 2 together where you're coming into a new kind of stitch or a new part of the new part of a pattern, or the rib is going to come up and meet somewhere. In this case it's just before we start the body of the sock. So after our rib 2 together instruction, the next instruction is to rib 2 together, rib 6, and to do that 3 times. So there is our rib 2 together. We've worked 1, 2 stitches, 1, 2. So I'm going to work 3, 4, 5, 6, and the next stitch is a purl, so we're going to purl those 2 together, and again the next stitch is a purl, so we're going to use that, and we're going to carry on with this instruction, rib 6 and then rib 2 together. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and obviously because we're going in even numbers here, it's going to come up as a purl again. So we've got the purl stitch, we're going to purl these 2 stitches together, and then the next stitch is a purl, so we're going to purl that one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and the next stitch is a purl, so we're going to purl these 2 stitches together, okay, and then the last instruction is just to rib the last 7 stitches. So I'm going to rib the last 7 stitches, just work these stitches and meet you back here. Okay, so I've just finished that last 7 stitches and turned round, and you can see if you look closely where the rib 2 together stitches are on the work. If you're working the larger size of the socks, they're probably going to be, those decreases may well be knit 2 together rather than a purl 2 together, but that's why they use the instruction rib 2 together, because it could be either. It depends where you need to put 2 stitches together along the rib. So don't worry if you're doing the larger size sock and it's a knit 2 together instead of a purl 2 together, just do that, that's absolutely fine. So now what we're going to do is to change colour onto the main colour of the sock, which in this case is this lovely pearl pink. And you can see here, when we change in, we're going to go straight into the garter stitch and just a plain knit stitch for the rest of the sock, which is absolutely lovely. So let's take that off, and I'm going to snip off. I'm going to leave a very longish tail just so that it's easy for us to weave that in afterwards. So joining in a new colour, all you need to do is to knit it in. So I'm just going to take my new colour, put a loop around the needle there, and then just start knitting. So with the strand that's attached to the ball, not the tail, the working yarn. So the next instruction is just to knit 8 rows. So as you come across, and obviously if you're going to stay in the same colour and you're not doing a 2-colour sock, you don't need to change, you can just carry on knitting from the ball that you're on. But these socks have that nice contrast, and there are so many colours in the Cashmerino chunky range that you can use that look lovely. See what I often do when one of these change colour moments come, because it can get a bit baggy. I just tie those two together in a little knot like that, so that when you actually come to sew them in, they're there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit 8 rows. I'm going to meet you back here. So I've knitted the 8 rows of garter stitch, of knit stitch, and the next thing we're going to do is to shape the instep of the sock. Now if you've got this sock on, this part here is the instep. It's the bit on the top of your foot, and you can see here, just in the sort of structure of this, here are the 8 rows that we've knitted just now, and this part here, this section here, is the instep. That's the section we're going to knit next. What we do here is, the instruction is to knit 24 and then turn. So I'm going to knit 24. See if I can hold my needles without dropping them. 1, 2, 3. So we have 24 stitches on the right hand needle. And now it's going to ask us to turn and work on the next 12 stitches. Now if you haven't done any of these sort of short row techniques before, there are lots of different ways. There are sort of wrap and turns and different kinds of turns, and German short rows and Norwegian short rows, all sorts of different short rows. But in this pattern, there's no wrapping, it's just turning and knitting. So when the pattern tells you to turn, you just turn. So you turn, and you know you're on the wrong side of your knitting because you can see where you changed colour. So this is the right side where you can't see. The wrong side is where you can see where you've changed colour. So we're going to knit, you just pick up the yarn as if you're just going to knit any old row, and knit 12 stitches. 1, 2, so you're knitting back along where you've just been. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now these 12 stitches are going to be the instep of the foot. So the next instruction is to turn. We turn around again, and now what we're going to do is we're going to knit just these 12 stitches. So you knit along, turn, knit back, turn, knit along, turn, back, turn, and we need to work 37 rows just on these 12 stitches, and that creates this section here. Okay, so I'll just show you one of those and then we'll finish that section. So I'm going to carry on working the 12 rows, 12 stitches. Here we go. And then when we get to the end of the 12 stitches, and here you can tell you're coming to the end because there's a gap where you turned before. So that's the 12. We turn, and then work back along those. And just as a point, if you lose count and you don't know how many you've done, every garter stitch ridge like this is 2 rows, so you can count in twos, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, like that. So we're going to work 37 rows of just plain garter stitch, knit stitch on the 12 stitches to create the instep. So I shall meet you back when I have 37 rows on my 12 stitches. So the next phase, now that we've knitted our 37 rows and you've got a right side row here, is we're going to deal with the toe shaping. Now this is the left slipper, and so the big toe shaping, this sort of nice triangle here, is on the right hand side. This is going to be the right slipper, and so the shaping is going to be on the left hand side. So this is how we do it. And I know this feels kind of quite strange, having this big sort of flap of instep there on your knitting, but there's a lot of that in one of these socks, is that you're sort of working on different parts at different times. But now we're going to work on shaping the toe. So this is how we first turn the work. So we're going to be working on the wrong side, and the first thing we do is we're going to knit 3 and turn. 1, 2, 3. So we've knitted 3, turn, and then we knit to the end of those 3. Then we turn the work again. And now we're going to knit 6 and turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we turn, and then we knit those 6 stitches back again. What we're doing here is creating a little triangle for your big toe. So we go back, then we're going to turn, and now we're going to knit 9. Can you see how that's starting to shape into a triangle? So 1, 9, and then we turn, and we're going to knit back along those 9 stitches. So you can see it's got sort of, you've built in a kind of a little triangular wedge. So now we're going to turn over, and we're going to knit all the way back down the 12 stitches of the instep, as that's created the little toe. So if we just have a look at that now, you can see there's that sort of lovely wedge shape, and that is going to create this. You can see where it's happened there on the right slipper, which is the one we're doing now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut off this yarn here, and then we're going to pick up some stitches around this part. So I'm going to do that and meet you back here. Now, using the existing stock we've got, I just want to show you how it works. So you can see where we knitted this section first, and now we've knitted the toe. Now what we need to do is to knit the sides of the stocking, the slipper. So we're going to pick up some stitches along the side here of the instep and come all the way around so that we can knit backwards and forwards to create the sides of the sock. So to do that, remember we snipped off our yarn there. We're going to rejoin the yarn down here at the bottom of the instep. Now, what we're going to do is to pick up stitches along here. And the pattern asks us to pick up 20 stitches along the side of the instep. Now, when you pick up stitches along a long side of something and you want to make sure that you're doing it quite evenly, a good idea is to give yourself a halfway marker. So if I just sort of fold this in half, just roughly, I can see that there is my halfway mark, about there. I'm just going to put a pin or a needle or something in there. So you know that if you've got to pick up 20 stitches, you're going to do 10 to there and 10 to there, rather than picking up loads of stitches all the way here and then thinking, oh, I've only got 5 stitches left for that bit, or only picking up 5 down here and thinking, how am I going to get 15 in there? So it's a really good idea to put a halfway mark in. If it's a really long stretch of knitting, put in markers every quarter of the way, if that helps you. So picking up stitches, so we're going to rejoin the yarn as we're going to pick up along the way. Now, to do this, you kind of use the existing work as your other needle, and we use the right hand needle to pick up the work, to pick up the stitches. So I'm going to pop the right hand needle, bearing in mind we've got to get 10 stitches between here and here, I'm going to put the needle in like that, into the work. Put my little loop round and then just knit the stitch like that. Then I'm going to put it in again. 1, 2. That's just going into the knitting like that. And then bring the yarn round and pull it through. 3, 4. Now let's just have a recap of where I am. So I've got 4 there, so I need 5 to that moment there, so which is about a quarter of the way. Got 5, and then I think, right, got to pick up 5 stitches from here to here. So I'll go in 1 there, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to pick 1 right up there by my halfway mark, 5. So I've got picked up 10 stitches along that first bit. Then I'm just going to remove that little needle out of the way, because I know now I've got to pick up another 10 stitches from here to here. So sort of 5 to there. Actually, I might just pop that in just to give me a guide. About halfway mark is there. So I want 5 and 5. So you put your needle into the stitch. I've actually just popped it into the end of the rows there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoops, just do that one again. Just popping out. And then 5 is where my needle is. Let's just take that out. And then I've got another 5 to pick up along there. 1, 2. So we've picked up 20 stitches up the side of the instep, and then when we get to the 12 centre stitches here, what we're going to do is knit 2 together. So we knit the first 2 together. Just hold that tail out of the way. And then we knit 8. 1, oopsie, 2, 3, 4. It's a little bit twisted. 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then at the end here, we're going to do something called SKPO, which is we slip 1 and then we knit 1 and then pass the slip stitch over. Now the slip stitch is just that 1 second to last, and we just lift that over, and that creates an angled decrease. So the next thing we do is we're going to pick up 23 stitches along this side of the instep. This is the other side, so it's 20 stitches on this side and 23 on this side, and the reason for that is that we've got the extra stitches here from the shaping for the toe. So I'm just going to, like we did before, pick up the stitches going along. 1, 2, 3, so that's the extra 3, and then we'll do 20 down here. So I'm going to have about 10 to the middle there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this can be very sort of tight going, and you have to stretch this yarn, stretch the work around to meet it. 8, 9. Let's just do 9 again there. 9, 10. That'll be 10 there, and then we've got another 10 to pick up for the second half. So that's 1, 2, I've just got 3 to pick up down here. 8, 9, 10. So once we've picked up the 10 there, so that gives us 23 all the way along. Pull that one through. Then the last thing to do is to knit across the 12 stitches that are on the other needle, and that brings us all the stitches together to start working the foot, the little toe as it curls around, which I'll show you now. So I'll see you when I get to the end of this. Okay, so now we have all the stitches for the whole width of the sock on the needle. We are at this point, so we've knitted the lovely toe shaping, and then you can see all the way round the toe is the way that we bring the foot around to make the sole. And so the first thing we do to get that is to knit 9 rows, and this is just knitting, plain knitting, garter stitch 9 rows from this point onwards. Now when you are knitting this row, the first row, because you've picked the stitches up from the side of the work, is going to be a bit stiff, and as you knit, don't be frightened of sort of like pushing this bit of middle sock in and out of the way as you go along. This will get easier and this will get more pronounced as you go. But all we need to do now is just begin knitting 9 rows all the way along, back and forth, to make the sides of your slipper sock. So I will see you back here at the end of 9 rows. So I've knitted my 9 rows from the point at which we'd picked up the instep here, and so we're at the point now where we need to knit the sole of the sock. This is on the wrong side, so there's the heel, and this is going to be the sole of the sock. And so the first thing that we need to do, and I know this is very strange, isn't it, having all this bunched up, this toe on the front, but you can see now kind of how it's going to work. This is going to come round the side and you're going to knit the back of the sock on there. So the first thing we're going to do is to transfer the first 31 stitches from here and put them on the right hand needle. And the reason for that is because we're going to start working on the sole of the foot. So I'm just going to lift off these stitches, 31 stitches. Whoopsie, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 29, 30, 31. So they're going to sit there. Now I'm going to snip off the yarn over here. So we're going to work on the 12 stitches on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to rejoin the yarn from the ball and work 12 stitches. Remember, this 12 stitches is our instep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 12. So that takes us across the instep, and then we turn. When we knit socks in the round, we talk a lot about turning the heel. And in fact, what we're doing here is turning the toe. So the first row of us turning the toe is to knit 9 and then turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we turn, and then on this side I'm going to knit 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're going to knit 2 together. Now notice the 2 we're going to knit together is where we've turned before. And you'll see this coming up now in the next section as we make the work just curl round. So these two we're going to knit together. And then we turn. Oops, drop that there. Next row, we knit 6 and turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and turn. And then we're going to knit 5 and knit 2 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and guess what? There it is again. This is where we turned before, so we're going to knit these 2 together. And turn. Now, our next part here, we're going to knit 3 and turn. 1, 2, 3, and turn. Now we're going to knit 2, 1, 2, and knit 2 together across the gap again there. And can you see the way that this is now curling over? This is actually taking us around, turning the toe there. Oopsie, just dropped a stitch. Don't want to be doing that. Okay. And now we're going to turn and knit 11. So now we're going right the way back across. 1, 2, 11, and knit 2 together. And then turn. Now, at this point you can see that we have come all the way around, and that is now beautifully turned into a lovely toe. The last row of that we did, knit 11, knit 2 together and turn, is what we're going to do until we've only got 24 stitches left. And so I'll do the first one with you, and then I'll meet you back here. So we just do exactly the same thing. Knit 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then we knit 2 together across that gap, and then we turn and we do that row again. Knit 11, knit 2 together, turn, and you do that until you only have 24 stitches left on the needles. So I'll meet you back there when we're that point. Right, so we have now worked the knit 11, knit 2 together stitch row all the way until we're left with 24 stitches along the top. And now what we're going to do, you can see you've got the sock here with the toe nicely turned, ready to join at the heel. And first of all, we're going to cast off the 24 stitches at the top here. So just to give you a little refresher, you knit 1, knit the second stitch, and then lift the first stitch over the second. So knit 1, pass the stitch over, knit 1, pass the stitch over, and we work this way, just getting rid of all this 24 stitches, and then we're ready to sew up. So I'll meet you back there. Right, so we're ready to sew up the sock. I've got a little bit of the rose yarn just to sew together the ribbing so you don't get too much of a contrast. And the first thing that we do is that we bring the heel together here, across there, and these two seams are going to join together, and that gives us a little bit here of heel to join. So I'm going to use this little tail to sew these together. I left a really long tail on the other side to come up here, but I'm going to start off by using this tail. Always really good actually to go in and sew in all your ends before you start. You can turn it inside out and sew them in afterwards, but we'll have a look at sewing in an end in a minute. But so I'm going to just pinch that together. If you want to, you can pin them. I'm going to just turn that round to face me there. And so I've got a tapestry needle here, and I'll just thread that through. So here with the heel, what I've done actually on the first sock is just to use a kind of whip stitch to stitch this together. What's important when you're sewing together a sock like this is that you know it's going to get some pretty hard wear. I mean, even if you're just padding about wearing them, they need to be just stitched together nicely so that they are quite firm. They're not going to fall apart the first time you wear them. So I'll work just to there and meet you when I've sewn up the other end. So I've got a nice firm seam there, and then to come up the back of the sock, what I'm going to do is use a mattress stitch, and I'll show you how we do this. It's just quite a nice neat seam. When you use it on stockinette or stocking stitch, you can almost make the seam disappear. You can't quite do that with garter stitch, but it's a really neat way to finish it off. So what we do is we look in the stitch for the little horizontal bar. You see what in there? That's in the middle, and we grab that on both sides. Let's dig down there. There it is. There. And we just skip from side to side, finding that horizontal bar, which is in the middle of the stitches there. And you'll see as we sort of pull it together, I'm just going to do this deliberately unpulled tight so I can show you how it closes up. So that looks a bit baggy at the moment, but if I pull this, it just pulls the seam in together. It's not entirely invisible, but it's better than just over sewing. So just by looking for those horizontal bars in the middle of the stitches there, which is actually a purl bump from the other side, but there it is. There we go. And we work our way up the seam, and as I said before, I have saved a bit of the rose colour to work through the rib to sew that up. I'm just going to pull that tightly again. Ooh, the magic of mattress stitch, that's lovely. Nearly up to the ribbing. So we work up the ribbing in exactly the same way as I'm doing here. And then sew in your ends, and they're ready to wear. So I'm going to switch over now to the rose yarn to come up the ribbing. And just to show you, so finding the horizontal bar in the ribbing is even easier because you've got bars deep in here that you can use for sewing up. So I'll see you when that's finished. So there we have a left foot and a right foot. See how the toes work. Super comfy slipper socks to wear while you're padding around the house. Absolutely gorgeously soft cashmerino chunky to keep you nice and cosy in the cold weather. So there we are, all finished, and learning some really good tips and techniques along the way, I hope. I'm going to keep these for me, and I hope you're going to knit something like this for friends and family or somebody you think needs cosy toes. Tell me in the comments, what colour are you going to knit? Who are you going to make them for? I'd love to know. Don't forget, like and subscribe to the channel for lots more techniques, patterns and tips. Happy knitting!